They came in uniform, or at least what looked like uniform. Two men with cuffs, badges, and authority stamped on their chest. And they weren't here for a crime. They were here because a neighborhood queen decided I didn't belong. But what they didn't know, I am the law, the real law. The question is, how do you face someone pretending to have power when the real power is in your hands? Little did I know, this quiet street was about to become a battlefield, and my own home the front line. The street was quiet, almost deceptively so. Oak trees arched over sidewalks, casting patterned shadows across neatly trimmed lawns. My new house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, fresh paint still smelling in the air, boxes scattered like small mountains waiting to be conquered. I had worked 2 decades in law enforcement, 15 in SWAT, the last 5 as chief, but here, in this small town, I was just a man seeking peace. Neighbors waved politely, a young couple brought over cookies, Duke from across the street hummed while chasing leaves with his blower. For 3 weeks, it felt like a reward I had earned, a quiet place to breathe again. I unpacked, set up my garage workshop, even placed a framed picture of my grandpa on a shelf. He had taught me discipline, respect, and how to spot when someone was trying to bend the rules for their own gain. And then the first warning appeared, bright red paper tucked under the wiper of my personal truck. Violation notice. It screamed. My lawn was too high. A fine had been assessed, signed by Karen Vanfleet, president of the Oak Street Homeowners Association. I glanced at my neighbors' lawns. Identical. I felt a tightening in my chest, not anger yet, but that familiar weight of duty, the kind that comes when someone is abusing imaginary authority. I pocketed the notice, telling myself it was nothing, but a shadow had fallen over my quiet street. And I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning. Little did I know, those first harmless-looking papers were only the opening moves in a game that would test everything I stood for: law, order, and my own patience. The first notice felt like a mistake. The second, deliberate. By the third, it was personal. Bright red slips of paper appeared on my doorstep, under the wiper blade of my truck, even tucked into my mailbox. Each one carried some imagined infraction: lawn too long, trash can left out too long, a hedge not trimmed to exact specifications. They were all signed by Karen Vanfleet, the so-called president of the Oak Street Homeowners Association. At first, I thought it was harmless bureaucracy, a misguided neighbor overstepping, but the language in those notices was designed to intimidate. Immediate compliance required, further action pending, legal consequences. It wasn't about order. It was about control, and they wanted to see how far I'd bend. I walked my lawn, with a measuring tape in hand, checking the grass height, the spacing of the shrubs. Everything was within reason, everything perfectly fine. And yet, the fines kept coming. $50, $75, $100, each one added to the growing. Weight in my pocket and the tightening in my gut. Then came the inspections. A woman with sharp features, clipboard in hand, began pacing the street. She stared at my property, her eyes narrow, her mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval. I caught her once taking notes on my hedges, another time measuring the angle of my mailbox. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her scrutiny, the judgment pressing against me like a physical weight. The harassment escalated further. One morning, my driveway was blocked by a black SUV. 2 men wearing what looked like uniforms but with badges that were clearly printed stepped out. They introduced themselves as officers from the HOA's enforcement division. My stomach dropped. My hand hovered near the keys to my truck. They had the posture, the confidence, the fake authority of people who think power comes from a badge, not law. "You are in violation," one of them said, voice cold and mechanical. "You must come with us." I paused, smiled slightly. I knew my rights, my jurisdiction, and the truth of my authority. But inside, I felt that familiar tension, the storm before the calm. These were bullies in uniform, testing the waters, and I had to be precise. Days turned into a pattern of threats, notes and surveillance. My mail was filled with legal-looking letters demanding compliance. My neighbors began to whisper. Some glanced nervously when I walked by, others pretended they hadn't seen anything. It was clear Karen was building her army, a little fiefdom, ruled by fear. I didn't respond immediately. Not yet. Every action she took, every inch she tried to claim, was a move in a dangerous game. I began documenting everything. The notes, the photos, the measurements, even the time of day these imposters showed up. My garage became an archive of evidence, a quiet arsenal of truth waiting for the moment to strike. Late one evening, I watched. From my porch, as two more officers approached, cuffs dangling from their belts, a sense of authority forced and fake. They didn't know I had spent years enforcing real law. They didn't know this quiet man in a fresh house was also the chief of police, the one trained to see deception, to spot weakness, and to act decisively. The tension hit its peak the morning the HOA tried to push the boundaries entirely. Notices escalated to threats of arrest. They sent certified letters claiming I could be forcibly removed from my home. I felt my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the calculation of the inevitable confrontation. Every move, every violation, every letter was designed to provoke. They wanted me to overreact. They wanted to make me the villain. But I didn't. I waited. I planned. Each act of intimidation was catalogued. Each lie, each attempt at manufactured authority. The neighborhood that had seemed so calm now felt like a chessboard, and I was ready to make the next move, the one that would change everything. Little did they know, the next time those fake officers stepped onto my porch, they wouldn't be facing just a homeowner. They'd be facing the chief of police, and my patience had finally reached its limit. The morning was overcast, the air thick with tension. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, and froze. Two men in uniform, cuffs swinging at their belts, badges gleaming like tin, were walking toward me. Their expressions were serious, rehearsed, professional. Behind them, Karen Vanfleet lingered, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. They stopped. "You need to come with us. You're under arrest for violating HOA regulations." I looked at them, at the fake badges, the stiff posture, the forced confidence, and I smiled. Not because I was amused, but because I knew the truth. Every fiber of authority in me, the real authority, was alert, calculating. These were imposters, amateurs playing a role, and I was about to end their little charade. "Under arrest?" I echoed, setting my coffee down. "Do you know who you're talking to?" They didn't. Karen's smirk widened. She thought the intimidation would work. She thought she had power. I walked toward them slowly, deliberately, letting every step carry weight. "I am the chief of police," I said, voice low but firm. "Everything you're doing right now, every threat, every so-called citation, is fraudulent." Their faces flickered. Uncertainty, panic. I could see it. Years of training sharpened. My instincts, and I knew exactly how to push them where they were weakest, their fear of real authority. I gestured toward my camera mounted in the corner of the porch. "This entire encounter is being documented. Every word, every action." "And Karen," I said, turning to the HOA queen herself, "you've been orchestrating a criminal conspiracy to intimidate neighbors. That's fraud, not governance." The air shifted. Karen opened her mouth, faltered, then shut it. The fake officers exchanged nervous glances. Their confidence crumbled under the weight of truth. The power dynamic had flipped in an instant. I stepped closer, carefully, so they felt the full presence of law. Not aggression, but authority. "I suggest you leave," I said, "before this becomes a matter for the courts, and believe me, it will." Karen's face paled. Her smirk was gone, replaced with something closer to disbelief. The impostors hesitated, then turned and walked away, their shuffle heavy with shame. I picked up my coffee, took a deep breath, and looked out at my street, the lawns, the trees, the quiet that had almost been stolen from us. For the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again, and yet I knew this was only the beginning. Justice had been served in the moment, but the shadow of what she tried to do lingered. The battle on the porch was won, but the war was far from over. I needed a permanent solution, a way to make sure no one else would fall victim to Karen's little empire of intimidation. The storm had passed, but the echoes lingered. Karen Vanfleet no longer strutted down the street with imagined authority, and the fake officers never returned. The red notices stopped appearing on my porch. For a moment, it felt like peace had returned. I could breathe again, walk my lawn, without fear, even wave at neighbors without the weight of scrutiny pressing down. But the experience left its mark. I realized how fragile the line between order and chaos can be, how easily someone can invent rules and use them to manipulate others. My quiet street had become a testing ground for someone else's ego, and I had been forced to respond with every skill, every lesson, every instinct I had spent decades honing. It was exhausting, infuriating, and ultimately empowering. I organized all the evidence, filed formal complaints, and ensured that no one else in the neighborhood could fall prey to Karen's false authority again. The HOA she had built in her mind was nothing more than a shadow. Legal documents confirmed. It and the threat was neutralized. But beyond the paperwork, the lesson remained. Authority is not granted by paper, position, or intimidation. It's earned, proven, and respected, or it crumbles. Looking out from my porch now, I see the oak trees, the neatly trimmed lawns, the quiet street I had hoped for. It's mine, not because I fought for it with fists or fear, but because I stood for truth and justice. I think of my grandpa, who believed that order without fairness is tyranny, and I smile. He would have approved of the way I handled it. The ordeal changed me. It reminded me that good people must sometimes confront the boldness of those who abuse power. Silence only encourages the next bully. And so I ask myself, and you, listening, what would you do if someone tried to steal your peace, your home, or your authority over your own life? Would you stay silent, or would you stand? Because in the end, the difference between victim and victor is not luck, it's courage.